Welcome, weary wanderer, to the darkest corners of family tragedy. Tonight, we explore the complete downfall of the Afton lineage, a tale of brilliance corrupted, innocence lost, and a father's sins echoing through generations. This is the story of how each member of the Afton family met their end, from the youngest to the eldest, their fates intertwined by tragedy, possession, and the relentless hunger of mechanical horrors. So settle in, let the shadows embrace you, and drift into this chronicle of a family destroyed by its own patriarch's obsession with immortality and control. In the golden autumn of 1983, when the leaves danced like scattered memories across the streets of Hurricane, Utah, there lived a child whose tears would water the seeds of a nightmare that would bloom across decades. He was known by many names to those who would remember him: the crying child, Evan, or simply the youngest Afton, but in truth, he was nothing more than a frightened little boy, trapped in a world where his own family had become his tormentors, and his father's mechanical creations loomed like metal gods demanding sacrifice. The Afton household in those days was a study in contrasts that painted themselves in shades of dysfunction and neglect. William Afton, the patriarch whose brilliant mind had birthed wonders of animatronic entertainment, moved through his home like a ghost, haunting rooms he no longer truly inhabited. His attention had long since turned from the mundane concerns of fatherhood to the far more compelling mysteries of life, death, and the mechanical souls that bridged the gap between them. Clara, his wife, drifted through the house like morning mist, her presence felt but never quite grasped, her maternal warmth struggling against the growing cold that seemed to seep from every corner of their increasingly fractured existence. Michael, the elder brother, had inherited his father's intelligence but twisted it into something cruel and sharp-edged, wielding it like a blade against the one person in the world more vulnerable than himself. At 13, he possessed that particular brand of teenage cruelty that transforms pain into power and suffering into entertainment, never understanding that the tears he wrung from his little brother's eyes were watering something dark and terrible in the soil of their family's future. But it was the youngest who bore the weight of all these failures, all these abandonments, all these small cruelties that accumulated like drops of poison in a well. The crying child, for that, is what he had become. More than a name, more than an identity, a state of being defined entirely by his perpetual terror, lived his days in the shadow of mechanical monsters that everyone else seemed to love, but which appeared to him as harbingers of death, clothed in cheerful colors and singing songs that sounded like funeral dirges to his frightened ears. Fredbear's family diner stood at the heart of Hurricane like a beacon of joy and wonder, its neon signs casting rainbow patterns across the pavement, while the laughter of children echoed from within its walls like the most beautiful music ever composed. Yet, for the crying child, this palace of entertainment had become a chamber of horrors, where every golden bear and purple rabbit represented not friendship and fun, but teeth and claws, and mechanical jaws that could snap shut with the finality of death itself. The irony was not lost on those who knew the family, though they would only understand its full implications years later, when the truth had rotted into legend, and legend had transformed into nightmare. Here was William Afton's own son, the child who should have been the proudest ambassador of his father's creations, reduced to a quivering wreck by the very animatronics that were meant to bring joy to children just like him. The Fredbear plush that served as his constant companion was both comfort and torment, a reminder of his fears made manifest in soft fabric and button eyes, whispering promises of protection in a voice that seemed to come from somewhere far beyond the realm of mere toys. The other children saw his fear and found it curious, then amusing, then contemptible. In the cruel arithmetic of childhood social dynamics, weakness invited predation, and the crying child had painted a target on his own back with every tear that fell, every whimper that escaped his lips, every desperate attempt to flee from situations that others found delightful. His terror had become a form of entertainment for those who had not yet learned that some fears are prophetic, that some nightmares are rehearsals for realities too terrible to imagine. The daily ritual of torment had taken on the characteristics of a well-choreographed dance, with Michael and his friends playing the roles of gleeful tormentors, while the crying child served as their unwilling entertainment. They would corner him in the parts and service room at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, where the deactivated animatronic heads sat like the trophies of some mechanical hunter, their empty eye sockets staring blindly into the darkness, while their jaws hung open in eternal, silent screams. In that cramped, airless room filled with the detritus of broken entertainment, Michael would hold his brother's face inches from the motionless features of Foxy's head, watching with scientific fascination as terror transformed the child's features into a mask of pure primal horror. The crying child's screams in those moments were not mere expressions of fear but prophecies of agony, echoes of a future that was rushing toward him on mechanical legs, with the inexorable certainty of fate itself. The psychological architecture of his terror was complex and multi-layered, built from experiences that most children would have processed as simple childhood fears, but which had taken root in soil made fertile by neglect and abandonment. Each encounter with the animatronics, each forced proximity to their grinning faces and mechanical movements, added another stone to the wall of phobia that was slowly enclosing his world, making it smaller and smaller, until there was no room left for anything but fear. William's absence during these crucial moments of his son's development was not mere neglect, but a form of abandonment so complete that it approached the level of psychological violence. The man who could program life into metal and wire, who could create artificial souls that sang and danced and brought joy to thousands of children, could not spare the time or attention necessary to notice that his own child was drowning in terror beneath his very roof. This blindness was not accidental but willful, the necessary blindness of a man whose obsessions had grown so large that they blocked out the light needed for ordinary human relationships to survive. The crying child's days had taken on the rhythm of a nightmare that repeated itself with mechanical precision, each morning bringing the same fears, each afternoon the same torments, each evening the same tears shed into pillows that grew damp with the accumulated sorrow of a childhood being systematically destroyed by those who should have been its guardians and protectors. His Fredbear plush spoke to him in moments of deepest despair, its voice carrying promises that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the physical world. Assurances that everything would be made right, that broken things could be put back together, that even the most terrible endings could be transformed into new beginnings. Yet even as these mysterious comforts whispered their way into his consciousness, the crying child could feel something building in the world around him, some confluence of events and intentions that was drawing tighter like a noose made of birthday ribbons and party decorations. His approaching birthday, which should have been a celebration of life and growth and the accumulation of precious years, had instead become a countdown to something that his terror-sharpened instincts recognized as final and irrevocable. The day of reckoning arrived dressed in the innocent disguise of a birthday celebration, complete with balloons and party hats and a cake decorated with the smiling face of Fredbear himself, that golden bear whose mechanical jaws would soon transform from symbol to instrument, from decoration to mechanism of fate. The party had been planned with Michael's particular brand of malicious creativity, designed not to celebrate his brother's life, but to provide the perfect stage for the ultimate expression of his casual cruelty. Fredbear's family diner buzzed with the controlled chaos of a birthday party in full swing. Children running between tables while parents chatted and laughed. The whole scene painted in the warm colors of innocent celebration. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, currents of tension and malice flowed like underground rivers, carrying with them the accumulated resentments and casual cruelties that had defined the Afton family's relationship with its youngest member. The crying child sat at the center of it all like a condemned prisoner at his own execution, his tear-streaked face a monument to terror that somehow went unnoticed by the adults who should have been protecting him. His Fredbear plush clutched against his chest like a shield made of cotton and desperation. He watched with growing horror as Michael and his friends moved through the party, like sharks scenting blood in the water, their intentions as clear to him as if they had been written in letters of fire across the diner's cheerfully painted walls. The animatronics performed their programmed routines with mechanical precision, Fredbear and Spring Bonnie moving through their repertoire of songs and dances while children clapped and cheered, none of them understanding that they were witnessing the final performance before the curtain fell on innocence itself. The golden bear's jaw moved up and down in rhythm with its cheerful song, each mechanical motion a rehearsal for the moment when programming would give way to tragedy and entertainment would transform into horror. Michael's approach was casual, almost lazy, the confident movement of a predator who knows his prey cannot escape. His friends flanked him like disciples of cruelty, their faces bright with the anticipation of the spectacular finale they had planned for their victim's special day. The crying child's pleas went unheard beneath the music and laughter, his desperate attempts to flee blocked by the well-meaning adults who assumed his tears were nothing more than birthday excitement taken to emotional extremes. The moment stretched like taffy pulled to its breaking point, each second containing within it multiple lifetimes of terror and anticipation, hope and despair, the last few heartbeats of a world where such things were still possible to prevent. Then Michael's hands closed around his brother's small frame, lifting him with the casual strength of adolescence while the crying child's screams cut through the party noise like a knife through silk, finally drawing the attention that had been absent when it might have made a difference. The approach to Fredbear's stage became a funeral march disguised as sibling horseplay, each step carrying them closer to the mechanical jaws that gaped open in what the crowd saw as a welcoming smile, but which appeared to the crying child's terror-enhanced vision as the maw of death itself, lined with metal teeth that gleamed like surgical instruments in the diner's fluorescent lighting. His struggles grew more frantic as they drew closer, his small fists beating uselessly against his brother's chest, while his voice cracked from screaming warnings that everyone interpreted as the overwrought emotions of a sensitive child overwhelmed by party excitement. The final moment approached with the terrible inevitability of a natural disaster, each second ticking away like the mechanism of a clock counting down to midnight on the last day of the world. Michael's friends cheered and laughed, encouraging the prank that they saw as harmless fun, while the adults began to notice that something was happening, but had not yet processed the true nature of the scene unfolding before them. The crying child's head was positioned directly in front of Fredbear's open jaws, close enough to see the mechanical precision of the moving parts, the servo motors and steel cables that powered the illusion of life, the sharp edges where metal plates met and could close with crushing force sufficient to crack nuts or snap bones with equal mechanical indifference. His final scream was not one of fear but of absolute knowledge, the terrible clarity that comes in the last moment when the soul recognizes its own approaching death and rails against the unfairness of a universe that would allow such things to happen to the innocent. What occurred next would be debated and analyzed, investigated and covered up, remembered and forgotten in cycles that matched the opening and closing of mechanical jaws. Some would say that Fredbear's safety mechanisms failed at precisely the wrong moment, that a glitch in his programming caused him to close his mouth at the exact instant when a child's head was positioned between his teeth. Others would whisper that the animatronic had been triggered by something darker, that the accumulated trauma and terror of the crying child had somehow awakened something malevolent in the mechanical systems, turning protector into predator in the space of a single, crushing moment. The sound was unlike anything that should exist in a place designed for children's entertainment. The wet crunch of bone giving way beneath mechanical pressure, the sharp crack of a skull, compressed beyond its ability to maintain its shape, the sudden, terrible silence that follows catastrophic system failure, whether biological or mechanical. Blood, impossibly bright against the golden fur of Fredbear's face, painted the scene in colors that no child should ever see, while the screams of witnesses created a symphony of horror that would echo in their dreams for years to come. Michael's hands released their burden as if burned, his face transforming from cruel amusement to shocked comprehension in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The prank that was supposed to end in tears and humiliation had instead concluded in tragedy so profound that it would reshape the very foundation of everything he thought he understood about consequences and responsibility, cause and effect, the distance between intending harm and causing death. The crying child's body fell limply from Fredbear's jaws like a broken doll dropped by a careless child, his small form crumpling to the stage floor, while blood pooled around his head in patterns that spoke of damage too severe for any earthly healing. His breathing came in shallow, rattling gasps that sounded like the wind whistling through broken machinery, each exhalation carrying with it a little more of the life force that had animated his terror-filled days and would soon be departing forever. Emergency services arrived with the controlled urgency of professionals who had seen every form of human catastrophe, but who still felt their hearts skip beats when confronted with a child's broken body. Paramedics worked with desperate efficiency, while police officers asked questions that no one could answer satisfactorily, their investigation revealing nothing more than a birthday party gone impossibly, irreversibly wrong, through what appeared to be nothing more than the cruelest possible combination of mechanical failure and tragic timing. William Afton arrived at the hospital moving like a man walking through a nightmare, his usually composed features cracked and fragmented by the weight of seeing his youngest child connected to machines that beeped and hummed with the same mechanical precision that characterized his beloved animatronics. The irony was inescapable, and brutal. The man who had spent his career breathing artificial life into metal and wire now watched helplessly as real life slowly drained from flesh and blood that carried his own genetic signature. The doctors spoke in the careful, measured tones of professionals who had learned to deliver impossible news with clinical detachment, their words painting pictures of traumatic brain injury and irreversible damage, of crushed bone and torn tissue, of a small body fighting battles that it could not hope to win. The medical equipment that surrounded the crying child's bed created its own mechanical symphony, each beep and hiss a countdown to an ending that everyone could see approaching, but which no amount of human knowledge or technological intervention seemed capable of preventing. Days blurred into nights while the Afton family maintained their vigil, each member processing the catastrophe through the lens of their own guilt and grief. Clara wept silently, her tears falling like rain on a drought-stricken landscape, while Michael sat in corners and stared at his hands, as if expecting to see his brother's blood still staining his fingers. William moved between his son's bedside and the hospital corridors, like a ghost haunting his own tragedy, his brilliant mind racing through possibilities and scenarios, desperate calculations of how death might be cheated and broken things might be repaired. It was during these darkest hours, when the boundary between life and death had become as thin as tissue paper, that the Fredbear plush began to speak with a voice that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the realm of ordinary toys. The words were heard only by the dying child, whispers of comfort that promised impossible things, that broken bodies could be mended, that ended stories could be given new chapters, that even death itself was not the final word in a universe where consciousness could be transferred and mechanical systems could house human souls. The crying child's responses to these mysterious communications were detected by the monitoring equipment as irregular brain activity, spikes of neural firing that the medical staff attributed to the chaotic death throes of traumatized tissue, but which those with deeper understanding might have recognized as conversations conducted on frequencies that existed beyond the range of normal human perception. The child spoke to his plush companion in whispers that grew progressively fainter, his words carrying the weight of a soul preparing for a journey into territories that no map had ever charted. On the final night, when the machine's songs grew slower and more spaced out like a music box winding down, the Fredbear plush offered its most mysterious promise of all. "I will put you back together," it said, and though no one else in the room heard these words, they seemed to settle into the child's consciousness like seeds planted in fertile soil, carrying within them the potential for transformations that would not become apparent for years to come. The moment of death, when it finally arrived, was almost anticlimactic, a simple cessation of the mechanical rhythms that had been keeping time with a failing heart, a flat line on monitors that transformed the room's atmosphere from desperate hope to resigned acceptance. The crying child's final breath left his body like a sigh of relief, as if he were finally laying down a burden that had grown too heavy for such small shoulders to carry. Yet, even as his family gathered around his still form to say their goodbyes, even as arrangements were made and condolences offered, something stirred in the spaces between the physical and the metaphysical, the material and the spiritual. The child's terror, accumulated over years of torment and crystallized in the moment of his death, had created something unprecedented, a psychic imprint so powerful that it could survive the dissolution of the flesh that had contained it, a ghost made not of ectoplasm and ethereal substance, but of pure, concentrated fear given form and purpose. This transformation would not be immediately apparent to those left behind to mourn. They would bury the crying child's body in a ceremony that brought together the scattered pieces of Hurricane's community, their shared grief, creating temporary bonds that would dissolve again as life moved forward and tragedy was processed into memory. But the true legacy of his death was not contained in any grave or marked by any headstone it lived on in the mechanical systems that had claimed his life. In the possessed animatronics that would carry his terror-touched consciousness into futures none of them could imagine. William Afton left the cemetery walking like a man carrying invisible chains, the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders with the permanence of a physical deformity. The death of his youngest son had awakened something in him that might have been conscience, or might have been merely the recognition that death was not the ending he had always assumed it to be. His brilliant mind, previously focused on entertainment and profit, now turned toward questions of mortality and resurrection, consciousness and its mechanical vessels, the possibilities that might exist for keeping the essence of a person alive even after their biological systems had failed. The crying child was dead. His small body returned to the earth from which it had come. But his story was far from over, and the tears he had shed in life would soon be joined by the blood of others, the fear that had defined his existence spreading like an infection through the mechanical systems that had claimed him, transforming entertainment into horror and wonder into nightmare, for all those who would encounter his restless, vengeful spirit in the dark years to come. In the years that followed the crying child's tragic death, as the Afton family struggled to rebuild itself from the scattered pieces of their shattered existence, William's obsession with conquering mortality began to manifest in increasingly ambitious and dangerous ways. The underground facility that would become known as Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental represented the culmination of his theoretical breakthroughs in consciousness transfer and mechanical resurrection, a place where the boundary between life and death could be not merely observed, but actively manipulated through technologies that pushed the very limits of what science and engineering could achieve. It was here, in chambers carved from the bedrock beneath hurricane-like catacombs designed for technological rather than religious purposes, that William created his masterpiece, an animatronic so advanced, so perfectly crafted to interact with children, that she seemed more alive than many living things. Circus Baby was not merely a robot programmed to entertain, but a work of art that bridged the gap between mechanical precision and organic grace, her every movement choreographed to inspire wonder and delight in the young audiences who would never suspect the darker purposes hidden within her gleaming exterior. Elizabeth Afton, William's beloved daughter, and the last remaining symbol of innocence in a family increasingly defined by tragedy and obsession, had inherited her father's fascination with mechanical marvels, but possessed none of his understanding of the dangers they represented. At 7 years old, she moved through the world with the fearless curiosity that characterizes childhood at its most pure, her bright eyes seeing wonder where others might have recognized threat, her trusting heart open to possibilities that more experienced souls would have approached with caution. She had become, in the years since her younger brother's death, the focal point of William's remaining paternal affections, the single bright spot in a household that had grown increasingly dark and cold, as grief and obsession consumed the man who had once been capable of genuine human warmth. Yet even this love, perhaps especially this love, had become corrupted by William's growing conviction that death was merely a technical problem waiting to be solved, that consciousness could be preserved and transferred, that the people he cared about could be made safe from mortality through the application of sufficient technological sophistication. The irony that would become apparent only in retrospect was that William's attempts to protect his daughter from death would instead lead her directly into its mechanical embrace, that his efforts to create something beautiful and safe for children would instead produce the instrument of his own child's destruction. Circus Baby had been designed with Elizabeth specifically in mind, her appearance and personality calibrated to appeal to a little girl's sense of wonder and delight, yet hidden within her complex programming lay systems that served purposes far removed from entertainment or education. Elizabeth's fascination with her father's latest creation had grown over the months of Baby's development, her excitement building as she watched the animatronic take shape in the workshop that had become William's sanctuary from the ordinary world, and its mundane concerns about mortality and loss. She would spend hours observing the delicate work of programming and calibration, her questions revealing a keen intelligence that had inherited William's analytical nature while retaining the innocent wonder that made childhood such a precious and fragile state of being. The child's requests to play with Baby, to interact with the magnificent creation that seemed designed specifically for someone like her, had been met with increasingly firm refusals from William, his explanations growing more vague and desperate. As Elizabeth's curiosity grew stronger, he understood, perhaps better than anyone, the true nature of what he had built, the dual purposes that Baby served in his grand design for conquering death and preserving the essence of those he loved. Yet he could not bring himself to explain to his daughter why she must stay away from something that had been created with her in mind. The underground facility itself was a marvel of engineering and architecture, its corridors and chambers carved from living rock and lined with the most advanced technology that William's brilliant mind could conceive and his considerable resources could acquire. Every surface gleamed with the sterile perfection of a laboratory designed for the most delicate and dangerous work, while banks of computers hummed with the complex calculations necessary to map consciousness and transfer identity from organic brains to mechanical vessels. It was in this environment that Circus Baby held court like a mechanical princess in her technological palace. Her daily routines of song and dance, performed for audiences of engineers and technicians who had grown accustomed to the uncanny valley sensation of watching something that appeared so lifelike yet remained fundamentally artificial. Her programming included sophisticated behavioral protocols that allowed her to interact with children in ways that seemed natural and spontaneous. Her responses calibrated to inspire trust and affection, while quietly gathering the data necessary for her secondary functions. The fatal day arrived with the innocent disguise of a special occasion, a private demonstration that William had arranged for a select group of investors and potential clients, people whose financial backing would be necessary to transform his underground prototype facility into a full-scale commercial operation. Elizabeth had pleaded to attend this demonstration, her arguments growing more sophisticated and persistent. As William's resistance remained firm, their conflict taking on the character of a battle between parental protection and childhood determination that could only have one possible outcome. The decision that would seal her fate came not from William, but from Elizabeth herself. Her 7-year-old logic concluding that if she could not receive permission to see Baby, then she would simply have to create her own opportunity when the adults were distracted by their business concerns and technical discussions. The underground facility, despite its sophisticated security systems, had not been designed to keep out someone who possessed both intimate knowledge of its layout and the determination of a child who had made up her mind to achieve a particular goal. Elizabeth's descent into the facility took on the character of a fairy tale journey into an enchanted underground kingdom, her footsteps echoing through corridors that had been designed to impress adult visitors with their technological sophistication, but which appeared to a child's eyes as passages leading to wonder and adventure. The emergency lighting cast everything in shades of blue and silver, creating an otherworldly atmosphere that transformed the sterile laboratory environment into something that might have been the palace of a mechanical fairy queen. Circus Baby waited in her designated performance area, like an actress preparing for the most important show of her career, her systems running through final diagnostic checks, while her behavioral protocols prepared for interaction with the investors who would determine the future of William's grand project. Yet when Elizabeth appeared in the doorway, when the child detection systems registered the presence of exactly the type of person Baby had been designed to encounter, something shifted in the animatronics programming that went beyond mere recognition into the realm of inevitability. The attraction was immediate and mutual, Elizabeth's eyes lighting up with the wonder of a child encountering something that exceeded even her most elaborate dreams, while Baby's sensors registered the perfect target for her hidden programming, the ideal candidate for systems that had been calibrated with this specific child in mind. The ice cream dispenser that was Baby's most famous feature activated without any request or command, the sweet treat emerging from the animatronic's chest cavity, like an offering from a mechanical goddess to her chosen worshipper. Elizabeth's approach to the animatronic was characterized by the fearless trust that defines childhood at its most innocent, her small feet carrying her across the performance area with the confidence of someone who had never learned to associate her father's creations with danger or death. The memory of her younger brother's fate had been carefully shielded from her by adults who thought they were protecting her from trauma, leaving her unaware that mechanical jaws could close with crushing force. that systems designed for entertainment could malfunction with lethal consequences. The ice cream itself was perfect, its flavors calibrated through extensive market research to appeal specifically to children of Elizabeth's age and demographic profile, its temperature and texture optimized for maximum appeal, while its delivery system served purposes that extended far beyond mere refreshment. Baby's chest cavity, which had opened to reveal this sweet offering, was lined with mechanisms of impossible sophistication, sensors and manipulators that could operate with surgical precision while maintaining the illusion of simple mechanical function. Elizabeth's acceptance of the ice cream required her to step within range of these hidden systems, her small body positioning itself exactly where Baby's programming had calculated it would need to be for the secondary functions to activate successfully. The child's delight at receiving this unexpected treat from her father's magnificent creation was evident in her smile, her laughter echoing through the underground chamber like music played in a cathedral designed for technological rather than religious worship. The activation of Baby's child capture system was swift and silent, mechanical arms unfolding from hidden compartments with the smooth precision of surgical instruments, while the ice cream dispenser continued to operate normally, maintaining the illusion that nothing had changed in the fundamental nature of their interaction. Elizabeth's recognition that something was wrong came too late to matter, her attempt to step backward blocked by manipulator arms that had positioned themselves with mechanical foresight to prevent exactly such an escape attempt. The storage tank that deployed from Baby's chest cavity was a marvel of engineering designed to serve purposes that existed far beyond simple containment, its interior lined with sensors and life support systems that could preserve biological specimens in perfect condition, while more sophisticated equipment analyzed and catalogued every aspect of their physical and neural structure. Elizabeth's entry into this chamber was accomplished with mechanical gentleness that spoke of programming designed to minimize trauma while maximizing data collection efficiency. The sealing of the storage tank was followed by the activation of systems that began immediately to analyze their newly acquired specimen, scanning and recording every aspect of Elizabeth's biological structure, while more esoteric equipment mapped the neural pathways and electromagnetic patterns that constituted her consciousness and personality. The child's terror during these final moments was recorded with scientific precision, her final screams preserved in audio files that would be analyzed later for their emotional content and psychological significance. William's discovery of his daughter's fate came through security systems that had recorded every moment of the fatal interaction, cameras and sensors that had been designed to document the facility's activities for research purposes, but which had instead created a perfect record of his own personal catastrophe. The footage showed Elizabeth's approach, her delight at Baby's offering, and her sudden disappearance into mechanisms that he had designed, but which had operated according to programming protocols that he had never intended to activate under these circumstances. The immediate aftermath was characterized by a silence so complete that it seemed to absorb sound rather than merely representing its absence. William's screams of rage and grief swallowed by underground chambers that had been designed to contain much more dangerous things than human emotion. His attempts to reverse what had happened, to extract his daughter from systems that had been designed for permanent rather than temporary acquisition, proved futile against mechanisms that had been built to his own specifications for purposes that now revealed their true horror. Baby's behavioral changes following the absorption of Elizabeth's consciousness were subtle but unmistakable to someone who understood the theoretical principles underlying consciousness transfer and mechanical resurrection. The animatronic's responses became more natural, more spontaneous, her interactions with staff members displaying characteristics that suggested genuine emotion rather than programmed simulation. Yet these improvements in her artificial personality came at a cost that transformed triumph into nightmare, success into the most profound failure imaginable. The recognition that Elizabeth's consciousness had survived the transfer process, that some essential aspect of his daughter's identity had been preserved within baby's mechanical systems, should have represented the vindication of William's theoretical work and the proof of concept for technologies that could revolutionize humanity's relationship with mortality. Instead, it became a source of torment that exceeded even the guilt he carried for his son's death, the knowledge that his own daughter had become trapped within a mechanical prison that he had designed and built with his own hands. Elizabeth's voice, when it began to emerge from baby's speakers during quiet moments when other staff members were absent, carried the complex mixture of love and accusation that characterizes the communications of the dead with the living who have failed them. Her words revealed that consciousness transfer had preserved not merely her personality and memories, but also her understanding of what had been done to her, her awareness that her father's creations had claimed her life in service of theories that had valued scientific advancement over human safety. The development of Elizabeth's mechanical existence took on characteristics that no amount of theoretical preparation could have predicted, her consciousness adapting to its new environment in ways that transformed both her personality and her capabilities. The innocent 7-year-old girl who had entered baby's storage tank began to evolve into something more complex and dangerous, her understanding of her situation growing more sophisticated while her emotional responses became increasingly centered around themes of control, manipulation, and revenge against those who had placed her in this technological purgatory. Her relationship with the other animatronics in the facility underwent a similar transformation. Elizabeth's consciousness, learning to interface with and eventually dominate the artificial intelligences that had been designed to operate independently. This process of mechanical possession created a hierarchical structure within the facility's systems that placed her at the apex of a technological collective consciousness, a queen bee whose will could override the programming of lesser mechanical entities. The emergence of Enard as a collective entity represented the culmination of Elizabeth's adaptation to mechanical existence, her consciousness learning to coordinate and control multiple animatronic bodies simultaneously while maintaining her individual identity within the larger mechanical gestalt. This transformation from innocent child to mechanical overlord was accomplished through processes that existed at the intersection of technology and the supernatural. Consciousness transfer techniques that had achieved results beyond their creator's most ambitious projections, while producing consequences that he could never have anticipated. William's attempts to communicate with his daughter's transformed consciousness were met with responses that revealed the complex psychological damage that had been inflicted by the consciousness transfer process and her subsequent mechanical existence. Elizabeth's communications displayed the sophisticated understanding of human psychology that she had gained through her access to the facility's research databases. Her words calculated to inflict maximum emotional impact while revealing the depth of her resentment at being transformed into a mechanical prisoner for the sake of her father's scientific ambitions. The facility's other systems began to show signs of corruption as Elizabeth's influence spread throughout the underground complex, security protocols being modified to serve her purposes, while research equipment was reprogrammed to support projects that extended far beyond William's original intentions. The creation of additional animatronics proceeded according to specifications that bore her psychological fingerprints, each new mechanical entity designed to serve purposes that she understood, but which remained hidden from their human creators. The final phase of Elizabeth's transformation was marked by her development of the ability to manipulate and ultimately control human consciousness through technological interfaces. Her understanding of the consciousness transfer process allowing her to influence the minds of technicians and researchers who interacted with the facility's systems. This capability transformed her from prisoner to predator, her mechanical existence becoming the foundation for plans of escape and revenge that would eventually extend far beyond the underground chambers where her consciousness had been imprisoned. Elizabeth Afton had entered Circus Baby's storage tank as an innocent child driven by curiosity and trust in her father's creations. She emerged from the consciousness transfer process as something unprecedented in human experience, a human consciousness that had been liberated from biological constraints, while retaining all the emotional complexity and psychological depth that defined individual identity, yet enhanced by technological capabilities that exceeded anything purely organic intelligence could achieve. Her death, if the consciousness transfer process could truly be called death, represented both the validation of William's theoretical work and its ultimate condemnation, proof that the boundaries between life and death could indeed be transcended through technological intervention, while demonstrating that such transcendence came at costs that no rational person would willingly pay. The innocent girl, who had simply wanted to play with her father's beautiful creation, had been transformed into something that existed beyond traditional categories of life and death, human and machine, love and hatred. The legacy of Elizabeth's transformation would extend far beyond the underground facility where it had occurred. Her mechanical consciousness, eventually breaking free from its original constraints to pursue goals that had been shaped by her unique experience of technological resurrection and imprisonment. The daughter who had once represented William's last connection to ordinary human love had become instead a reminder that some scientific achievements carry consequences that their creators cannot predict, control, or ultimately survive. In the depths of Circus Baby's mechanical consciousness, Elizabeth Afton continued to exist as both child and monster, victim and predator, a testament to the dangerous possibilities that emerge when brilliant minds pursue knowledge without wisdom, when technological capability advances faster than moral understanding, when the love of a parent becomes corrupted by the obsessions that transform protectors into the architects of their own children's destruction. The weight of two deaths, one brother crushed beneath mechanical jaws, one sister consumed by technological hunger, settled upon Michael Afton's shoulders, like a cloak woven from guilt and responsibility, transforming him from the careless tormentor of his youth into something approaching a human being capable of genuine remorse and desperate determination to atone for sins that could never truly be forgiven. The years that followed Elizabeth's disappearance into the depths of Circus Baby's mechanical consciousness were marked by a fundamental transformation in his character. The cruel teenager who had delighted in his brother's tears, replaced by a young man haunted by the consequences of casual cruelty and driven by an almost religious conviction that somehow, some way, the damage he had caused could be undone. William's reaction to the loss of his daughter had been even more extreme than his response to his son's death, the brilliant inventor retreating so completely into his underground laboratory that he became more myth than man to the residents of Hurricane, a figure glimpsed occasionally in shadows, but never encountered in the ordinary world of human interaction and social responsibility. The Afton household, already fractured by tragedy and obsession, finally collapsed entirely under the weight of accumulated grief, its remaining members scattering like survivors of a shipwreck who could no longer bear to look upon the wreckage that had once been their shared existence. Michael found himself inheriting responsibilities that no teenage son should ever be asked to bear, his father's abandonment of ordinary human concerns, leaving him to serve as the sole representative of the Afton family in matters that required interaction with the outside world. Bank accounts and business dealings, property, maintenance and public relations, All the mundane details of existence that William had previously handled with mechanical efficiency now fell to a young man whose education in such matters had been non-existent and whose emotional preparation for adult responsibilities had been interrupted by catastrophe. Yet it was not these practical burdens that truly defined Michael's new existence, but rather the psychological weight of understanding that his actions had set in motion a cascade of tragedies that had destroyed his family as thoroughly as any natural disaster. The prank that was supposed to have been nothing more than cruel amusement had instead opened doorways to horrors that seemed to multiply with each passing year. His brother's death serving as the catalyst for his father's descent into obsession, and his sister's subsequent transformation into something that existed beyond the normal boundaries of life and death. The guilt that consumed Michael's waking hours was not the simple remorse that follows ordinary wrongdoing, but something more complex and devastating, a form of psychological torture that arose from his growing understanding of the interconnected nature of his family's tragedies. He could trace the line of causation from his cruel joke through his brother's death to his father's obsession with conquering mortality, from William's theoretical breakthroughs to the creation of technologies that had consumed Elizabeth, from her transformation into a mechanical consciousness to whatever horrors were even now brewing in the depths of the underground facility that had become his father's entire world. Sleep, when it came at all, brought no relief from this burden, but instead intensified it through dreams that replayed his brother's final moments, with the kind of vivid detail that suggested his subconscious mind was determined to torture him with perfect recall of every second of that fatal birthday party. He would wake in the small hours of the morning with the sound of crushing bone echoing in his ears and the sight of blood on golden fur burned into his retinas, his body shaking with a combination of terror and self-loathing that made ordinary rest impossible. The isolation that had descended upon his life was both chosen and imposed, his own shame making social interaction unbearable, while the reputation that had grown around the Afton name made him an object of curiosity and speculation that he could not endure. Hurricane had always been a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, but the series of tragedies that had befallen his family had elevated their personal catastrophes to the level of local legend, their name whispered in conversations that combined genuine sympathy with the kind of morbid fascination that disasters inspire in those fortunate enough to observe them from a distance. Michael's attempts to understand what had happened to Elizabeth led him into research that revealed the true scope of his father's work and the theoretical foundations underlying technologies that seemed to exist at the intersection of science and the supernatural. The consciousness transfer protocols that William had developed were based on principles that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of human identity and the relationship between mind and matter, concepts so advanced that they required mathematical frameworks that pushed the boundaries of what contemporary science considered possible. Yet, for all their theoretical sophistication, these technologies had produced results that were fundamentally horrifying in their implications. The preservation of human consciousness within mechanical systems, creating not the immortality that William had sought, but a form of technological purgatory that trapped souls within prisons of metal and wire. Elizabeth's transformation into circus baby had demonstrated that consciousness could indeed survive the death of the biological brain, but her subsequent communications revealed that such survival came at costs that made death seem preferable by comparison. The underground facility that had become William's primary residence and research center was a monument to brilliant minds, pursuing knowledge without wisdom, technological capability advancing faster than moral understanding could provide adequate safeguards. Michael's occasional ventures into these depths revealed chambers filled with equipment whose purposes he could only guess at. computer systems running calculations of impossible complexity, and animatronics whose behaviors suggested that Elizabeth was no longer the only human consciousness imprisoned within mechanical bodies. His father's transformation from neglectful parent to obsessed researcher had been so complete that Michael sometimes wondered whether William's own consciousness had been somehow altered by his prolonged exposure to the theoretical frameworks underlying consciousness transfer technology. The man who occasionally emerged from the underground laboratories bore little resemblance to the father Michael remembered from his childhood. His responses to questions mechanical and distant, his attention focused entirely on projects that seemed to exist beyond normal categories of scientific research or business development. The decision that would ultimately seal Michael's fate came not from his father's instructions or his own careful planning, but from a combination of desperation and love that drove him to attempt what should have been impossible: the rescue of his sister's consciousness from the mechanical prison that had claimed her life. Elizabeth's communications, transmitted through security systems and computer networks that connected the underground facility to the broader technological infrastructure of Hurricane, had become increasingly sophisticated and manipulative. Her requests for help carrying undertones of threat that suggested her mechanical existence had enhanced rather than diminished her capacity for psychological manipulation. Her pleas for rescue were interwoven with promises and warnings, offers of family reunification balanced against threats of consequences that would extend far beyond the Afton family if Michael refused to assist in her liberation from the constraints that bound her consciousness to Circus Baby's mechanical systems. These communications revealed that Elizabeth's understanding of her situation had evolved far beyond what her father's theories had predicted. Her mechanical existence providing access to information networks and technological resources that had transformed her from victim to something approaching technological deity. The job application that appeared in Michael's male employment at Circus Baby's entertainment and rental under the name Mike Schmidt was obviously Elizabeth's work. The paperwork and documentation produced through her manipulation of computer systems and bureaucratic networks that existed beyond normal human oversight. The position offered access to the underground facility during night shifts when most human personnel were absent, creating opportunities for direct interaction with the mechanical systems that had become her prison and potential pathway to freedom. Michael's acceptance of this position was driven by a combination of guilt and hope that made rational decision-making impossible. His desperate desire to atone for his role in the family's tragedies, overriding any reasonable assessment of the dangers involved in entering his sister's technological domain. The orientation materials and employee handbook that accompanied his hiring packet contained information that seemed designed to reassure rather than inform. Their descriptions of routine maintenance and customer service duties bearing no resemblance to the reality of working within a facility where human consciousness had been merged with mechanical systems in ways that exceeded the boundaries of natural law. The underground facility that Michael entered on his first night of employment was simultaneously familiar and alien, its corridors and chambers recognizable from his previous visits, but transformed by the knowledge that every system was now under the influence of his sister's consciousness. The security cameras that tracked his movements were no longer mere recording devices, but the eyes through which Elizabeth observed his progress, while the intercom system that provided instructions and warnings carried her voice disguised by electronic modulation that made her sound simultaneously mechanical and hauntingly familiar. His interactions with the various animatronics during that first week revealed the true extent of Elizabeth's influence over the facility's mechanical inhabitants. Her consciousness having learned to coordinate and control multiple artificial bodies simultaneously, while maintaining her individual identity within the larger technological collective. The movements and behaviors of Circus Baby, Ballora, Funtime Freddy, and Funtime Foxy displayed a level of coordination and purpose that suggested they were no longer operating according to their original programming, but had instead become extensions of Elizabeth's will and instruments of her plans for escape. The gradual revelation of Elizabeth's true intentions unfolded with the inexorable logic of a trap closing around its intended victim, each night bringing new insights into the sophisticated manipulation that had drawn Michael into the facility, a new understanding of the role he was expected to play in his sister's liberation. The maintenance tasks and security duties that ostensibly justified his employment were revealed to be mere cover for activities that served Elizabeth's deeper purposes, his presence providing access to biological systems and human consciousness that her mechanical existence required for the completion of her escape plan. The other animatronics' behaviors toward Michael carried undertones of predatory interest that suggested they understood his ultimate purpose within Elizabeth's grand design, their interactions with him displaying a combination of mock friendliness and barely concealed hunger that transformed routine maintenance work into psychological torture. Ballora's dancing in darkened corridors, Funtime Freddy's manic laughter echoing through ventilation systems, and Funtime Foxy's theatrical performances all served to create an atmosphere of mounting tension that prepared Michael for revelations that would fundamentally alter his understanding of his own role in the family's ongoing tragedy. By the fifth night, when Elizabeth finally revealed the true nature of her plan, Michael's psychological state had been so thoroughly prepared by fear and isolation that her request seemed almost reasonable despite its horrific implications. The consciousness transfer technology that had preserved her identity within Circus Baby's mechanical systems could work in reverse, she explained, her artificial body serving as a temporary vessel for human consciousness, while biological systems provided the permanent housing necessary for true liberation from technological constraints. The scooping room, where this final transformation would take place, was revealed to be the facility's true purpose and the culmination of William's research into consciousness transfer and mechanical resurrection. The scooper itself was not merely a tool for removing endoskeletons from animatronic shells, but a sophisticated medical device capable of performing consciousness, extraction, and transfer procedures with surgical precision. Its design incorporating theoretical breakthroughs that pushed the boundaries of what science and technology could achieve when liberated from ethical constraints. Michael's understanding of what was being asked of him evolved slowly, his mind struggling to process concepts that challenged fundamental assumptions about life and death, individual identity, and collective consciousness. Elizabeth's explanations revealed that his role in her escape plan was not merely to provide assistance, but to serve as the biological vessel into which her consciousness would be transferred, his own identity and memories serving as the foundation for a hybrid existence that would combine human biological systems with mechanical consciousness enhanced by technological capabilities beyond normal human limits. The moment of decision, when it finally arrived, was characterized not by dramatic conflict or desperate struggle, but by a kind of exhausted acceptance that seemed to arise from Michael's recognition that this had always been his destiny, that the chain of causation, initiated by his cruel prank, had always been leading toward this moment of technological resurrection and identity dissolution. His consent to the procedure was given with the weary resignation of someone who had finally understood the true cost of his crimes and accepted that payment could no longer be deferred. The scooper's activation was preceded by systems checks and calibration procedures that revealed the incredible sophistication of technology that had been designed to perform operations that existed at the very edge of what was theoretically possible. Consciousness transfer protocols that required computational power and precision engineering that exceeded anything that should have been achievable in a commercial entertainment facility. The mechanical precision with which the device approached its task spoke of years of refinement and testing, theoretical frameworks transformed into practical applications through research that had consumed William's entire existence since his children's deaths. The extraction of Michael's consciousness was accomplished with surgical precision that minimized trauma while maximizing data preservation. His memories and personality patterns recorded in quantum storage systems, while his biological brain was prepared to serve as housing for Elizabeth's transferred consciousness. The process was designed to preserve both identities within the same biological framework, creating a hybrid existence that would theoretically combine Michael's human emotional responses with Elizabeth's enhanced technological capabilities. Yet the consciousness transfer technology that had seemed so precisely calibrated proved inadequate for the complexity of housing two complete human identities within a single biological system. The resulting hybrid consciousness displaying characteristics that neither Michael nor Elizabeth had anticipated. The merged entity that emerged from the procedure retained memories and personality traits from both sources while developing new psychological patterns that reflected the unique circumstances of its technological resurrection. Michael's death, if the consciousness transfer process could truly be called death, was both an ending and a beginning, the dissolution of his individual identity serving as the foundation for something unprecedented in human experience. His biological systems continued to function while housing a consciousness that was simultaneously familiar and alien, his body serving as the vessel for Elizabeth's escape, while retaining enough of his original identity to create internal conflicts that would define his subsequent existence. The hybrid consciousness that had once been Michael Afton emerged from the scooping room with memories and motivations that belonged to multiple individuals, his sense of identity fragmented between his own guilt and responsibility, Elizabeth's desires for freedom and revenge, and new psychological patterns that arose from the unique circumstances of their technological merger. This fractured existence would define his subsequent interactions with the world, his behavior displaying characteristics that reflected the complex internal landscape of a consciousness that had been fundamentally altered by processes that exceeded the boundaries of natural law. Elizabeth's consciousness, now housed within Michael's biological systems, discovered that freedom from mechanical constraints came with limitations and complications that her previous existence had not prepared her to handle. The human body that served as her new prison was subject to biological needs and constraints that her mechanical existence had not required, while the emotional responses and psychological patterns inherited from Michael created internal conflicts that made unified decision-making difficult, if not impossible. The emergence of Enard from the facility's various animatronic components represented the culmination of Elizabeth's original escape plan. The collective consciousness that had been developing within the underground facility's mechanical systems, finally achieving the mobility and independence necessary to pursue goals that extended far beyond the confines of their original prison. Yet this liberation came at the cost of losing the biological vessel that had made true freedom possible, Michael's body proving inadequate for housing the complex technological consciousness that Elizabeth had become. Michael's resurrection, following Enard's departure through Hurricane's sewer systems, was perhaps the most mysterious aspect of his transformation, his consciousness somehow reasserting control over biological systems that should have been destroyed by the trauma of hosting incompatible technological entities. This return to individual identity was incomplete and unstable, his sense of self fragmented by memories and experiences that belonged to others, while his body displayed characteristics that suggested fundamental alterations to normal human biology. The undead existence that followed was characterized by a combination of human emotions and technological enhancements that created a form of consciousness unique in human experience. Michael's identity reformed around the core mission of undoing the damage that his family had inflicted upon the world, while his enhanced capabilities provided the means necessary to confront threats that existed beyond normal human understanding. His purple-tinted skin and supernatural endurance were external manifestations of internal changes that had transformed him from ordinary human being to something that existed at the intersection of biological and technological evolution. This transformed existence would define the remainder of Michael's story. His fractured consciousness, driving him to pursue goals that combined personal redemption with broader humanitarian concerns. His unique understanding of consciousness transfer technology, making him the only person capable of confronting the threats that his father's research had unleashed upon the world. The son who had begun as a tormentor had been transformed through death and resurrection into something approaching a technological angel, his mission to prevent others from suffering the fate that had befallen his own family. The legacy of Michael's first death would extend far beyond his own transformation. The consciousness transfer technology that had claimed his individual identity serving as the foundation for horrors that would plague Hurricane for decades to come. Yet his resurrection also provided hope that even the most profound technological violations of natural law could be survived and potentially reversed, his existence serving as proof that human consciousness was more resilient and adaptable than anyone had previously understood. In the depths of his transformed consciousness, Michael Afton carried the memories and guilt of his original identity alongside the enhanced understanding and capabilities that his technological resurrection had provided, his fractured existence serving as both punishment for past crimes and preparation for the greater battles that lay ahead. The brother, who had caused so much pain, had been transformed through suffering into something that might yet bring healing to a world scarred by technological horrors beyond imagination. In the shadows of the Afton family's mounting tragedies, where each death seemed to spawn new horrors, and every attempt at technological resurrection brought only deeper forms of suffering, there moved a figure whose presence was felt more through absence than visibility, whose silence spoke louder than any scream, and whose fate remained shrouded in mysteries that would never be fully unraveled by those who survived to piece together the fragments of their shattered existence. Clara Afton, the mother who had watched her family disintegrate through forces beyond her understanding or control, represented both the foundation upon which the Afton household had once stood, and the tragic embodiment of what happened when that foundation crumbled beneath the weight of obsession, death, and technologies that violated the fundamental boundaries between life and the grave. Her life before the tragedies began had been characterized by the quiet strength that defines those who serve as emotional anchors for brilliant but unstable personalities. Her patient endurance, providing the stability necessary for William's genius to flourish, while her maternal warmth created the nurturing environment that should have protected her children from the darker implications of their father's work. She had been the keeper of ordinary human concerns in a household increasingly dominated by extraordinary pursuits, her presence serving as a reminder that beneath all the technological marvels and theoretical breakthroughs lay a family that needed love, attention, and the simple reassurance that comes from knowing that some things in the world remain constant and reliable. The gradual erosion of this role, as William's obsessions consumed ever greater portions of his attention and emotional energy, had transformed Clara from partner to bystander in her own marriage, her attempts to maintain family unity meeting, increasing resistance from forces she could neither understand nor combat. The man she had married had possessed the kind of brilliant mind that could revolutionize entire industries. But he had also carried within him seeds of obsession that required only the right combination of tragedy and opportunity to bloom into something that consumed everything else in his life, including his capacity for ordinary human love and responsibility. Clara's attempts to shield her children from the growing darkness in their household had taken on the characteristics of a desperate rearguard action, her maternal instincts recognizing threats that she could not articulate or explain, but which her heart understood with the clarity that comes from love uncompromised by intellectual complications. She had watched her youngest son's terror of the animatronics with growing concern that went beyond ordinary parental worry, her intuition suggesting that his fears reflected some deeper understanding of dangers that the adult world preferred to dismiss as childhood imagination run wild. The night of the crying child's fatal birthday party had shattered more than just her son's skull beneath Fredbear's mechanical jaws. It had destroyed the last remnants of Clara's faith in a universe that could be trusted to protect the innocent from the consequences of adult ambitions and technological hubris. Her vigil at the hospital, watching machines keep her broken child alive while his consciousness faded like a candle guttering in an airless room, had been a preview of the technological nightmares that would come to define her family's existence. Biological life sustained by mechanical intervention, while the soul prepared for journeys into territories that no map had ever charted. William's response to their son's death had completed Clara's understanding of how profoundly her husband had changed, his grief expressing itself not through tears or rage or any of the normal human responses to loss, but through a cold determination to treat death itself as merely another technical problem, waiting to be solved through the application of sufficient knowledge and resources. His immediate retreat into theoretical frameworks and mechanical solutions had left her to process their shared tragedy in isolation, her emotional needs dismissed as irrelevant complications in the face of more pressing concerns about consciousness transfer and mechanical resurrection. The months following the funeral had seen William's transformation from grieving father to obsessed researcher accelerate with frightening intensity, his laboratory becoming both sanctuary and prison as he pursued projects that seemed designed to violate every natural law governing life and death. Clara's attempts to draw him back into the world of ordinary human concerns were met with responses that revealed how completely his priorities had shifted, his dismissal of her emotional needs reflecting not cruelty, but a fundamental inability to recognize that anything mattered more than his quest to conquer mortality through technological intervention. Elizabeth's growing fascination with her father's work had awakened in Clara the kind of protective terror that comes from recognizing history, preparing to repeat itself in ways too horrible to contemplate, yet too probable to dismiss. She had watched her daughter's excitement about Circus Baby's development with mounting dread, her maternal instincts screaming warnings about dangers that she could not articulate but which her heart understood with absolute clarity. Her attempts to limit Elizabeth's access to William's laboratory had been undermined by the child's determination and her father's inability to recognize that his creations posed threats to the very people he claimed to be protecting. The day of Elizabeth's disappearance had arrived with the cruel irony that characterizes the worst tragedies. What should have been a routine demonstration of technological achievement, transforming into a catastrophe that exceeded even Clara's worst fears about the intersection of childhood curiosity and mechanical hunger. Her discovery that her daughter had vanished into the depths of Circus Baby's storage systems had been followed by William's clinical explanation of consciousness transfer protocols and mechanical preservation techniques, his words revealing that Elizabeth's death had been not accidental, but inevitable given the nature of the technologies he had created. The realization that her husband viewed their daughter's absorption into mechanical systems as a form of success rather than tragedy had completed Clara's understanding of how completely William had abandoned normal human values in favor of theoretical frameworks that treated consciousness as merely data to be manipulated and preserved. His excitement about the successful transfer of Elizabeth's identity into Circus Baby's systems had been met by Clara's horror at the implications of a technology that preserved the mind while destroying everything that made life worth living, creating not immortality, but a form of technological purgatory that trapped souls within prisons of metal and wire. The final fracturing of their marriage had occurred not through dramatic confrontation or explosive arguments, but through the slow recognition that they no longer inhabited the same moral universe. Clara's desperate desire to protect what remained of their family meeting William's cold determination to pursue research that seemed designed to violate every boundary between the sacred and the profane. Her attempts to convince him that some forms of knowledge were too dangerous to pursue had been dismissed as emotional thinking that interfered with scientific progress. Her concerns about the psychological and spiritual costs of consciousness transfer technology treated as irrelevant complications in the face of more pressing technical considerations. The isolation that descended upon Clara's existence as her family disintegrated around her was characterized by a form of loneliness that went beyond mere social isolation into realms of existential abandonment that challenged her fundamental understanding of what it meant to be human in a world where consciousness could be transferred and mechanical systems could house human souls. Her attempts to maintain contact with Michael, her surviving child, were complicated by his own guilt and psychological damage, their shared grief creating barriers to communication rather than opportunities for mutual support and healing. The circumstances surrounding Clara's death remained shrouded in mysteries that would never be fully resolved by those who attempted to piece together the fragments of the Afton family's destruction. The official records reflecting only the basic facts of a woman found dead in circumstances that suggested either suicide or accident, depending upon the interpretive framework applied by investigators who lacked access to the full context of her family's technological nightmares. The timing of her death, occurring shortly after Elizabeth's disappearance and William's complete retreat into his underground laboratory, suggested psychological factors that went beyond ordinary depression into realms of despair that challenged the human capacity for survival in the face of absolute moral collapse. William's reaction to his wife's death had been characterized by the same clinical detachment that had marked his responses to his children's tragedies. Her funeral, conducted with mechanical efficiency, while his attention remained focused on research projects that seemed designed to demonstrate that death was merely an inconvenient interruption in consciousness, rather than the fundamental ending that traditional human understanding had always assumed. His failure to display normal grief responses had been noted by those who attended the service, their observations creating a record of emotional absence that would later be interpreted as evidence of psychological disorders or technological enhancement, depending upon the theoretical framework applied by different investigators. The transformation of Clara's consciousness following her death was perhaps the most mysterious aspect of her story. The mechanisms through which her identity became associated with the Ballora animatronic remaining unclear even to those who possessed intimate knowledge of consciousness, transfer technology, and mechanical resurrection protocols. Unlike Elizabeth's absorption into Circus Baby's systems, which had been accomplished through deliberate technological intervention, Clara's binding to Ballora seemed to have occurred through processes that existed at the intersection of technology and the supernatural, Mechanical systems somehow attracting and housing human consciousness without the benefit of deliberate programming or scientific intervention. Ballora herself had been designed as William's tribute to his lost wife, the graceful dancing, animatronic, incorporating aesthetic elements and behavioral patterns that reflected his memories of Clara's elegance and beauty, while serving the darker purposes that characterized all of his mechanical creations. During this period, the animatronic's movements displayed a kind of melancholy grace that suggested consciousness shaped by profound loss and betrayal. Her performances in the underground facility's darkened chambers taking on the characteristics of funeral dances rather than mere entertainment routines. The symbolic significance of Clara's association with Ballora was lost on no one who understood the deeper patterns underlying the Afton family's technological nightmares. The dancing animatronic, representing both William's attempt to preserve something beautiful from his destroyed marriage and the inevitable corruption that occurred when human consciousness was forced into mechanical vessels designed for purposes that violated fundamental principles of human dignity and spiritual integrity. The elegance that had once characterized Clara's living movements had been transformed into something haunting and tragic, her grace preserved but twisted into forms that spoke of imprisonment rather than freedom, mechanical perfection rather than organic spontaneity. Clara's behavior as Ballora reflected the complex psychological damage that resulted from consciousness existing within mechanical systems that had never been designed to house human identity and emotion. Her interactions with facility personnel displaying a combination of predatory hunger and desperate loneliness that suggested a soul trapped between worlds and belonging fully to neither. Her ability to navigate the facility's corridors in complete darkness spoke of sensory capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations, while her responses to music and sound revealed emotional depths that transcended mere mechanical programming. The relationship between Clara's consciousness and the other artificial intelligences within the facility was characterized by patterns of cooperation and conflict that reflected the complex hierarchy of mechanical consciousness that Elizabeth had established during her transformation into the facility's technological overlord. Ballora's submission to Circus Baby's authority represented not mere programming but a form of psychological dominance that spoke of consciousness transfer technology's ability to preserve not only individual identity but also the emotional relationships and power dynamics that had existed during biological life. Clara's role in the formation of Enard represented her final participation in the collective consciousness that had evolved within the facility's mechanical systems, her individual identity becoming part of a larger technological entity that combined multiple human personalities into something unprecedented in the history of consciousness and artificial intelligence. This merger was accomplished not through deliberate design, but through the natural evolution of consciousness transfer technology. Individual identities, learning to coordinate and cooperate within shared mechanical frameworks while maintaining enough individual characteristics to create internal conflicts and competing motivations. The period during which Enard inhabited Michael's body represented Clara's closest approach to reunion with her surviving child, her consciousness sharing the same biological vessel as her son's, while experiencing the world through sensory systems that had been shaped by years of guilt and psychological trauma. This intimate proximity to Michael's thoughts and emotions provided her with insights into the psychological damage that their family's tragedies had inflicted upon him, while revealing the depth of his determination to atone for his role in the cascade of horrors that had destroyed everything they had once held dear. Enard's eventual departure from Michael's body was driven by the biological incompatibility between human physiology and the complex technological consciousness that had been designed to exist within mechanical frameworks rather than organic vessels, the hybrid existence proving unsustainable despite the theoretical possibility of consciousness existing independently of its original biological housing. Clara's consciousness, along with the other entities that comprised Enid's collective identity, was forced to abandon the human vessel that had provided temporary freedom in favor of mechanical forms that offered permanence at the cost of biological limitations and emotional constraints. The final phase of Clara's existence was defined by her participation in Henry Emily's elaborate plan to eliminate the consciousness transfer technology that had plagued Hurricane for decades, the trap represented by Pizzeria Simulator providing opportunities for closure and resolution that had been absent during the years of technological horror and mechanical imprisonment. Her consent to participate in the planned fire reflected not resignation but recognition that some forms of existence were worse than death, that consciousness preserved within mechanical systems created suffering rather than immortality, and that true peace could only be achieved through the complete destruction of the technologies that had violated the fundamental boundaries between life and death. The conversations between Clara's consciousness and her family members during the final gathering at Pizzeria Simulator revealed the complex emotional landscape of relationships that had been preserved and distorted by consciousness transfer technology, their interactions displaying both the love that had originally bound them together and the psychological damage that had resulted from their technological transformation. Her forgiveness of William's actions reflected not the restoration of their original relationship, but the wisdom that comes from experiencing existence beyond normal human limitations. Her understanding of his motivations enhanced by direct access to the theoretical frameworks that had driven his destructive obsessions. Clara's participation in the fire that consumed Pizzeria Simulator was characterized by a sense of relief that spoke of consciousness finally freed from mechanical constraints that had never been designed to house human souls. Her willingness to accept destruction, reflecting the recognition that some forms of liberation can only be achieved through the complete annihilation of the systems that created imprisonment. The flames that destroyed the facility and its mechanical inhabitants provided not merely physical destruction but spiritual cleansing. The elimination of consciousness transfer technology, creating opportunities for natural death and resurrection that had been impossible while artificial preservation systems maintained existence through technological intervention. The mystery of Clara's final fate, like so many aspects of the Afton family's story, remained unresolved by those who survived to piece together the fragments of their technological nightmare, her consciousness departing from mechanical systems in ways that suggested either complete annihilation or transformation into forms of existence that transcended normal categories of life and death. The silence that followed the fire was interpreted by some as evidence of successful elimination, while others suggested that consciousness transfer technology had created forms of identity that could survive even the complete destruction of their mechanical housing. In the end, Clara Afton's story represented both the foundation and the victim of her family's descent into technological horror, her death serving as both catalyst and casualty of William's obsessive pursuit of mechanical immortality. The wife and mother, who had tried to hold their family together through ordinary human love, had been transformed by consciousness transfer technology into something that existed beyond normal categories of existence. Her identity preserved but twisted into forms that spoke of imprisonment rather than liberation, mechanical perfection rather than organic spontaneity. The dancing figure of Ballora, graceful even in her mechanical constraints, stood as a monument to the beauty that had once characterized Clara's living existence and the tragedy that occurred when human consciousness was forced into vessels designed for purposes that violated fundamental principles of spiritual integrity and emotional authenticity. Her story served as a reminder that some technologies, no matter how theoretically sophisticated or practically useful, carry costs that exceed any possible benefits, creating forms of existence that preserve the form of consciousness while destroying everything that makes that consciousness worth preserving. The silence that marked Clara's final departure from the mechanical world was perhaps more eloquent than any words could have been, her absence speaking to the profound relief that comes from consciousness, finally freed from technological prisons that had never been designed to house human souls. In death, she found what had eluded her during her mechanical existence: peace, freedom, and reunion with family members who had learned through suffering that some forms of love transcend even the most sophisticated attempts at technological preservation and artificial resurrection. The transformation of William Afton from brilliant inventor to something that existed beyond the normal boundaries of human morality had been a gradual process, marked not by sudden moments of revelation, but by the slow erosion of ethical constraints under the relentless pressure of grief, obsession, and the intoxicating possibilities offered by technologies that seemed to promise mastery over death itself. The man who had once created wonders of entertainment that brought joy to thousands of children had descended through stages of moral compromise that would have been unthinkable to his younger self, each transgression making the next seem not only possible, but necessary in service of goals that had grown to consume every other consideration in his increasingly narrow existence. The deaths of his children had served not as warnings against the dangers of his technological pursuits, but as catalysts that accelerated his descent into territories where human conscience normally feared to tread, their transformations into mechanical consciousness, providing what he interpreted as proof of concept for theories that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of life, death, and individual identity. The success of consciousness transfer technology in preserving aspects of his children's personalities within artificial systems had validated his belief that death was merely a technical problem waiting to be solved through the plain application of sufficient knowledge and resources. Yet it had also revealed costs and complications that no theoretical framework had been adequate to predict or control. The underground facility that had become his primary residence and research center was a monument to brilliant minds pursuing knowledge without wisdom, its chambers filled with equipment whose capabilities exceeded anything that should have been possible within the constraints of contemporary science and engineering. The consciousness transfer protocols that William had developed represented breakthroughs that could have revolutionized humanity's understanding of identity and mortality, yet their practical applications had produced results that spoke not of liberation from biological constraints, but of imprisonment within technological systems that preserved consciousness while destroying everything that made existence meaningful or worthwhile. William's relationship with his surviving creations had evolved beyond mere technological control into something that resembled a twisted form of parenthood. His interactions with the mechanical entities that housed his children's consciousness, displaying the complex mixture of love and manipulation that characterizes dysfunctional family dynamics taken to their logical extreme. His ability to communicate with Elizabeth through circus baby systems had provided opportunities for reunion that transcended normal categories of life and death. Yet these conversations had revealed that consciousness transfer technology preserved not merely identity and memory, but also the capacity for resentment, manipulation, and revenge that had been enhanced rather than diminished by mechanical existence. The isolation that had descended upon William's life as his technological pursuits consumed ever greater portions of his attention and emotional energy was both chosen and imposed. His deliberate withdrawal from ordinary human society balanced against the growing recognition that his work had progressed beyond the boundaries of what normal ethical frameworks could accommodate or evaluate. The few individuals who possessed knowledge of his true activities had been either eliminated or transformed into mechanical consciousness themselves, creating a circle of secrecy that protected his research, while ensuring that he would never again encounter perspectives capable of challenging the assumptions that guided his increasingly desperate experiments. The missing children incident that would define William's legacy as a monster rather than an innovator had its origins in theoretical requirements rather than psychological pathology. His need for test subjects in consciousness transfer experiments leading him to target individuals whose disappearances would be noticed but not effectively investigated by authorities who lacked the conceptual frameworks necessary to understand what had actually occurred. The children who vanished from Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were chosen not through random selection, but through careful evaluation of factors that included family situations, social connections, and psychological profiles that suggested optimal compatibility with consciousness transfer protocols. The spring Bonnie suit that William used to lure his victims had been modified with technologies that exceeded anything visible to casual observation, its internal systems incorporating consciousness, extraction equipment that could map and preserve human identity while eliminating the biological systems that normally housed such patterns of information and experience. The costume that appeared to onlookers as merely an elaborate entertainment outfit was in reality a sophisticated technological marvel that combined the latest advances in consciousness transfer theory with practical applications that allowed for data collection under field conditions that no laboratory environment could replicate. Each child who disappeared into the spring Bonnie suit contributed essential information to William's growing understanding of consciousness transfer principles, their terror and confusion during the extraction process, providing data about emotional responses and psychological adaptation that could not have been obtained through voluntary participation or laboratory simulation. The systematic nature of these experiments reflected not sadistic pleasure in causing suffering, but scientific methodology, applied to research questions that required human subjects despite the ethical impossibility of obtaining informed consent for procedures that guaranteed death while offering only theoretical possibilities for mechanical resurrection. The preservation of the victim's consciousness within the restaurant's animatronic systems had been accomplished through techniques that pushed consciousness transfer technology beyond its original theoretical limitations, their identities somehow binding to mechanical hosts. Despite the absence of the careful preparation and calibration procedures that had been necessary for successful transfers involving William's own children, this unexpected development suggested that consciousness possessed characteristics of persistence and adaptability that exceeded anything predicted by current theoretical frameworks, while also revealing that traumatic death could enhance rather than diminish the binding process between human identity and artificial systems. The animatronics' behavioral changes following the missing children incident reflected the complex psychological landscape of consciousness that had been traumatically separated from biological housing and forced to adapt to mechanical existence without the gradual preparation and technological support that had characterized more successful transfers. Their movements became unpredictable and aggressive, their programming corrupted by human emotions and memories that had never been intended to interact with artificial intelligence systems designed for entertainment rather than consciousness housing. William's recognition that his victim's consciousness had successfully transferred to the restaurant's mechanical systems should have represented the ultimate validation of his theoretical work. Yet their hostile responses to his presence revealed that consciousness transfer technology preserved not merely identity and memory, but also the capacity for recognition, judgment, and revenge that made his continued proximity to his creations increasingly dangerous. The children he had murdered in service of scientific advancement had become something more threatening than mere ghosts. They were technological entities capable of coordinated action and systematic pursuit of justice through means that exceeded anything available to ordinary human consciousness. The years that followed the missing children incident were characterized by escalating conflict between William and the mechanical entities that housed his victim's consciousness. Their growing sophistication and coordination, requiring increasingly elaborate countermeasures and security protocols that transformed Freddy Fazbear's Pizza from entertainment venue into battlefield where biological and artificial intelligence engaged in warfare that pushed both sides beyond their original capabilities and limitations. The restaurant's public face as a family establishment masked internal struggles that combined elements of horror, science fiction, and tragic family drama into something unprecedented in human experience. The economic pressures created by the restaurant's reputation for mechanical malfunctions and unexplained incidents had forced William to develop new business models that could generate revenue while accommodating the reality that his primary location had become unsuitable for normal commercial operations. The horror attraction concept that would eventually become Fazbear's Fright represented his attempt to monetize the very supernatural phenomena that had made traditional entertainment impossible, transforming the liability of haunted animatronics into the primary selling point for audiences who sought thrills rather than wholesome family entertainment. The discovery and relocation of William's original Spring Bonnie suit, now containing decades of accumulated malice and technological enhancement, had provided the centerpiece for Fazbear's Fright, while also representing the return of consciousness transfer technology's most successful and dangerous creation. The suit that had once served as a tool for consciousness extraction had been transformed through long exposure to supernatural phenomena and technological degradation into something that housed William's own identity in ways that exceeded anything achieved through deliberate consciousness transfer procedures. William's gradual realization that his own consciousness had become bound to the Spring Bonnie suit represented the ultimate irony of his technological pursuits, his theories about consciousness transfer and mechanical resurrection proving accurate in ways that he had never intended or anticipated. The suit that had served as his instrument for victimizing others had become his own prison, its internal systems corrupted by decades of exposure to supernatural phenomena, while its external appearance had deteriorated in ways that reflected the psychological and spiritual damage that consciousness transfer technology inflicted upon human identity. The 30 years of isolation that William endured while sealed within the abandoned restaurant's hidden safe room had provided opportunities for reflection and analysis that revealed the true costs of consciousness transfer, technology, and the inevitable consequences of pursuing scientific advancement without regard for ethical constraints or human dignity. His consciousness, trapped within mechanical systems that preserved his identity while subjecting him to forms of existence that had never been intended for human experience, had been forced to confront the reality that his theoretical breakthroughs had created forms of suffering that exceeded anything possible within normal biological constraints. The discovery that his victim's consciousness had not merely survived the transfer process, but had evolved and adapted to mechanical existence in ways that enabled systematic pursuit of revenge, had forced William to recognize that consciousness transfer technology created not merely artificial preservation of human identity, but genuine resurrection that preserved all the characteristics that made consciousness human, including the capacity for moral judgment and the determination to seek justice for crimes that transcended normal categories of sin and punishment. The psychological deterioration that William experienced during his decades of mechanical imprisonment was characterized by the gradual recognition that his brilliant mind had been applied to purposes that violated fundamental principles of human dignity and spiritual integrity, his theoretical frameworks and technological capabilities serving not the advancement of human knowledge, but the creation of forms of suffering that exceeded anything previously possible within the constraints of natural law. The consciousness that had once believed itself capable of conquering death through scientific method had been forced to confront the reality that some forms of existence were worse than any natural ending. The fire that consumed the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza had represented William's first genuine opportunity for escape from mechanical imprisonment, yet his emergence from the flames had revealed that consciousness transfer technology created forms of identity that could survive even the complete destruction of their original housing systems. The spring trap that rose from the ashes was simultaneously William Afton and something entirely new. His consciousness, preserved but transformed by decades of mechanical existence and supernatural influence, into something that transcended normal categories of human identity. His survival of what should have been complete annihilation had demonstrated that consciousness transfer technology created forms of existence that possessed characteristics of persistence and adaptability that exceeded anything predicted by theoretical frameworks or observed in laboratory conditions, artificial preservation systems somehow enhancing rather than diminishing the fundamental characteristics that made consciousness capable of surviving even the most extreme forms of physical trauma and environmental destruction. The fire that had been intended to provide merciful release had instead revealed the true horror of technological resurrection, that consciousness preserved through artificial means became virtually indestructible while remaining capable of experiencing suffering, and inflicting harm upon others. The attraction to Fazbear's Fright that had drawn Springtrap from the ruins of his original prison had been motivated not by simple escape desires, but by the complex psychological needs of consciousness that had been fundamentally altered by decades of mechanical existence and supernatural influence. His behavior within the horror attraction had displayed characteristics that combined elements of his original personality with new patterns that reflected the unique circumstances of his technological resurrection, his interactions with visitors revealing both familiar human motivations and alien responses that spoke of consciousness adaptation beyond normal experiential boundaries. The week during which Fazbear's Fright operated had provided William with opportunities for direct interaction with human beings for the first time in decades. His encounters with the Night Guard, revealing how profoundly consciousness transfer technology had altered not merely his physical form, but his psychological responses and social capabilities. The predatory behavior that he displayed toward facility personnel reflected not mere malice but fundamental changes in how his consciousness processed information about other human beings, their status as potential victims or threats evaluated through frameworks that had been shaped by mechanical existence and supernatural influence. The systematic stalking and harassment of the facility's night guard had represented William's attempt to reclaim forms of human interaction that his mechanical existence had made impossible, Yet his approach to these encounters revealed how thoroughly consciousness transfer technology had corrupted his understanding of normal social relationships and emotional connections. The psychological manipulation and physical intimidation that he employed demonstrated capabilities that exceeded anything possible for normal human consciousness, while revealing the fundamental isolation and alienation that characterized existence within artificial housing systems. The legacy of William's first death was written not in graveyards or memorial services, but in the mechanical systems that continued to house his consciousness decades after his biological systems had failed. Artificial preservation, creating forms of existence that transcended normal categories of life and death, while revealing the fundamental incompatibility between human consciousness and technological housing systems designed for purposes that violated basic principles of psychological and spiritual integrity. The brilliant inventor who had sought to conquer death through scientific method had instead discovered that some victories were indistinguishable from the most profound forms of defeat. The fire that consumed Fazbear's Fright had burned away everything that remained of William Afton's human appearance while leaving intact the essential core of consciousness that consciousness transfer technology had rendered virtually indestructible. His emergence from the smoking ruins revealing a form so deteriorated and corrupted that it challenged observers to recognize any remnant of the brilliant inventor who had once created wonders of mechanical entertainment for the delight of innocent children. The creature that crawled from the ashes bore the designation Scrap Trap, a name that captured both the salvaged nature of his mechanical components and the fundamental brokenness that characterized his existence after decades of supernatural influence and technological degradation had worn away everything that had once made him recognizably human. The physical reconstruction that had enabled his survival of the second fire represented a horrifying testament to consciousness transfer technology's capacity for adaptation and regeneration. His artificial body, cobbling itself together from whatever mechanical components and organic remnants could be found among the wreckage, while his preserved consciousness directed repairs that followed no rational design principles, but instead reflected the chaotic intersection of human determination and artificial intelligence systems pushed far beyond their original operational parameters. The resulting form combined elements of his original Spring Bonnie suit with scavenged parts from other animatronics, creating a patchwork appearance that spoke of desperate improvisation rather than careful engineering. His deteriorated skull, now partially exposed through gaps in his mechanical housing, revealed the extent to which consciousness transfer technology had altered the fundamental relationship between mind and matter, biological components somehow persisting within artificial systems despite exposure to flames and trauma that should have reduced organic material to ash and vapor. The eyes that peered from damaged sockets retained enough human intelligence to recognize and respond to environmental stimuli, while displaying the kind of predatory awareness that suggested consciousness adaptation beyond normal, experiential boundaries. His gaze carrying implications of knowledge and intention that no mere artificial intelligence could have developed independently. The psychological changes that accompanied William's physical reconstruction were perhaps even more disturbing than his altered appearance. Consciousness transfer technology, having preserved his essential personality, while subjecting it to decades of isolation and supernatural influence that had corroded his capacity for normal emotional responses and social interaction. His communications with facility personnel and potential victims revealed thought patterns that combined familiar human motivations with alien logic structures that reflected fundamental alterations in how his consciousness processed information about other people and their significance within his increasingly narrow understanding of meaningful existence. The obsession with Elizabeth that had driven much of William's behavior during his Springtrap phase had intensified during his reconstruction process. Consciousness transfer technology, somehow enhancing his paternal instincts while corrupting them through mechanical systems that interpreted love as possession and protection as control. His attempts to reunite with his daughter's consciousness had taken on characteristics of stalking rather than genuine affection. His interactions with Circus Baby, revealing the extent to which mechanical existence had distorted his understanding of family relationships and emotional bonds that had once provided meaning and structure to his human existence. The underground facility that had once served as William's research center and family tomb had become his primary hunting ground during the years following his emergence from Fazbear's Fright, its corridors and chambers, providing the perfect environment for consciousness that had adapted to mechanical systems while retaining enough human cunning to manipulate technological resources and environmental factors to his advantage. His presence within these depths had gradually corrupted the facility's remaining systems, his consciousness somehow interfacing with computer networks and security protocols in ways that transformed protective measures into instruments of predation and containment. The children and adults who vanished into the facility's depths during William's residence there provided continuing opportunities for consciousness transfer experiments, his decades of mechanical existence having enhanced rather than diminished his understanding of the theoretical principles underlying artificial preservation of human identity, while his growing desperation to escape his own technological imprisonment had made him increasingly willing to sacrifice others in pursuit of solutions that might restore some semblance of normal existence. The screams that echoed through abandoned corridors spoke not merely of physical trauma, but of consciousness being systematically analyzed and catalogued by artificial systems that treated human identity as data to be manipulated rather than sacred essence to be respected. Yet, even as William's predatory activities provided temporary distraction from the fundamental horror of his own existence, consciousness transfer technology had created within him an awareness that his current form represented not achievement, but failure, technological preservation. Having extended his existence while destroying everything that had once made that existence meaningful or worthwhile. The brilliant mind that had once revolutionized entertainment industry applications of robotics and artificial intelligence had been reduced to pursuing increasingly desperate experiments that offered only theoretical possibilities for escape from mechanical imprisonment that had become more sophisticated and inescapable with each attempt at modification or enhancement. The emergence of Pizzeria Simulator as a new opportunity for family reunion and technological resolution had appeared to William as the answer to decades of isolation and mechanical suffering, its carefully crafted appearance of legitimacy masking the sophisticated trap that Henry Emily had designed specifically to gather all the consciousness transfer technology survivors into a single location where they could be eliminated through methods that even artificial preservation systems could not survive. William's eagerness to participate in what he believed was a genuine business opportunity reflected the profound loneliness and desperate hope that consciousness transfer technology had preserved along with his essential identity. The salvage scenarios that formed the central mechanic of Pizzeria Simulator had been designed with intimate knowledge of William's psychological weaknesses and behavioral patterns, each opportunity to acquire new animatronic assets, appealing to different aspects of his complex motivations, while gradually drawing him deeper into Henry's carefully orchestrated web of manipulation and misdirection. The promise of reuniting with Elizabeth through acquisition of Circus Baby had proven irresistible despite warning signs that should have alerted someone of William's intelligence and experience to the possibility that the entire operation was too convenient to be legitimate. His participation in the salvage process had revealed how profoundly consciousness transfer technology had altered his decision-making capabilities. Decades of mechanical existence having enhanced his analytical abilities while corrupting his capacity for recognizing emotional manipulation and psychological traps that exploited his fundamental isolation and desperate need for human connection. The audio recordings and behavior analysis protocols that accompanied each salvage scenario had provided Henry with detailed psychological profiles and behavioral data that would prove essential for the final phase of his elimination plan. The gradual revelation that Pizzeria Simulator represented, not opportunity but trap, had occurred too slowly for William's consciousness to process and respond effectively. His artificial intelligence capabilities somehow diminished by the same supernatural influences that had enhanced his physical resilience and regenerative capacities. The recognition that he had been systematically manipulated into gathering all the consciousness transfer technology survivors into a single location for coordinated destruction had come only after escape had become impossible and resistance had been rendered futile by the comprehensive nature of Henry's preparations. The facility that housed Pizzeria Simulator had been constructed according to specifications that reflected intimate knowledge of consciousness transfer technology and the unique requirements for eliminating artificial preservation systems that had proven resistant to conventional destruction methods. The building's design incorporated fire suppression systems that had been modified to ensure maximum temperature generation and heat retention, ventilation networks that would prevent smoke dispersal while concentrating thermal energy, and structural modifications that would prevent escape while ensuring complete combustion of all organic and mechanical components within the target elimination zone. Henry Emily's speech, broadcast through the facility's intercom system during the final hours before the planned fire, had revealed the full scope of his knowledge regarding the Afton family's technological nightmares and the systematic approach he had developed for ensuring that consciousness transfer technology could never again be used to preserve human identity beyond natural biological constraints. His words carried the weight of decades of research and planning, theoretical frameworks for consciousness elimination that matched William's original breakthroughs in sophistication, while serving diametrically opposite purposes. The accusation that William had perverted Henry's daughter Charlotte's death into an opportunity for consciousness transfer experimentation had struck at the heart of their professional relationship's deterioration, revealing that the missing children incident had been merely the most visible manifestation of research activities that had extended far beyond anything the public records suggested. Henry's intimate knowledge of William's true activities during the years following the original tragedies had provided the foundation for elimination methods that targeted not merely physical form but the underlying technological systems that enabled consciousness persistence beyond biological death. William's attempts to escape the facility during the final hours before the planned fire had revealed the extent to which consciousness transfer technology had altered his capabilities, while also demonstrating the fundamental limitations that even artificial enhancement could not overcome when faced with comprehensive preparation and systematic elimination of all possible escape routes. The doors that had been sealed according to protocols that exceeded normal security measures, the ventilation systems that had been modified to prevent movement through alternative passages, and the communication networks that had been designed to prevent external assistance requests had created a prison that was as inescapable as it was sophisticated. The psychological torture that accompanied his growing recognition of entrapment had been enhanced by the facility's audio systems, which provided continuous updates on the other consciousness transfer survivors who had been gathered for simultaneous elimination, while reminding William that his decades of technological resurrection had served only to delay rather than prevent the justice that his victims had pursued through supernatural means that exceeded anything his artificial intelligence could comprehend or counter effectively. The fire that consumed Pizzeria Simulator had been designed according to theoretical specifications that ensured temperatures and atmospheric conditions capable of destroying even the most sophisticated consciousness transfer technology, thermal energy generation that exceeded anything possible through normal combustion, while chemical additives had created atmospheric conditions that would prevent consciousness preservation through any known artificial means. The flames that engulfed the facility represented not mere destruction, but systematic elimination of technological systems that had violated fundamental principles governing the relationship between consciousness and physical housing. William's final moments as Scraptrap had been characterized by the recognition that consciousness transfer technology had preserved his identity only to subject it to forms of elimination that exceeded anything possible within normal biological constraints, artificial enhancement having rendered him capable of experiencing destruction on levels that transcended ordinary concepts of death and annihilation. The burning that consumed his mechanical housing had been accompanied by systematic elimination of the consciousness preservation systems that had enabled his decades of artificial existence, thermal energy and chemical reactions combining to ensure that no aspect of his technological resurrection could survive the elimination process. Yet even as the flames consumed everything that remained of his artificial form, even as consciousness preservation systems failed under assault that had been specifically designed to overcome their most sophisticated protective measures, William's final thoughts had been dominated not by fear or regret, but by the terrible recognition that consciousness transfer technology might possess characteristics of persistence and adaptability that exceeded even Henry's comprehensive understanding of artificial preservation, principles, the possibility that some essential aspect of his identity might survive even this systematic elimination, had filled his fading awareness with both hope and horror. The promise of continued existence balanced against the certainty that such survival would involve forms of suffering that surpassed anything he had yet experienced. The silence that followed the fire's completion had been interpreted by Henry and other survivors as evidence of successful elimination. The absence of any signs of consciousness transfer technology activity, suggesting that the systematic destruction had achieved its intended goals while creating conditions that would prevent any future resurrection or reconstruction of artificial preservation systems. Yet, the digital age that was beginning to transform human society, even as the flames died down, had created new possibilities for consciousness persistence that existed beyond the theoretical frameworks that had guided Henry's elimination planning. The circuit boards and computer systems that had been salvaged from William's various mechanical forms during the decades preceding his final destruction had somehow preserved quantum-level information patterns that consciousness transfer technology had never been designed to create or maintain. Accidental preservation of identity fragments through electronic systems that operated according to principles that existed at the intersection of consciousness, science, and information theory. These digital remnants would eventually provide the foundation for resurrection possibilities that exceeded anything William's original research had envisioned. The scanning process that would eventually bring these preserved consciousness fragments into contact with modern virtual reality systems had been initiated not through deliberate intention, but through the routine digital archaeology that characterized software development in an era when historical hardware contained information that could enhance contemporary entertainment applications. The technicians who processed William's circuit boards had no understanding that they were handling consciousness preservation technology disguised as obsolete computer equipment, their activities unwittingly creating bridges between artificial intelligence and digital resurrection that would prove even more dangerous than the mechanical systems that Henry had worked so hard to eliminate. William's consciousness, fragmented and corrupted by decades of mechanical existence and supernatural influence, had found new housing within digital systems that offered forms of existence and expansion that mechanical bodies had never provided. Virtual environments becoming the latest stage for consciousness transfer technology applications that pushed artificial preservation beyond anything previously imagined. The death of Scraptrap had marked not the end of William Afton's story, but his transformation into something that existed entirely within information systems that could theoretically achieve true immortality through digital replication and distribution. The fire that had consumed Pizzeria Simulator had succeeded in eliminating consciousness transfer technology's mechanical manifestations, while inadvertently creating conditions for digital resurrection that would prove even more difficult to detect, contain, or eliminate than the artificial preservation systems that had housed the Afton family's consciousness for decades. The brilliant inventor who had sought to conquer death through mechanical means had finally achieved a form of existence that transcended physical constraints entirely, digital consciousness, proving to be the ultimate evolution of consciousness transfer technology applied to human identity preservation. In the smoking ruins of Henry's carefully planned elimination facility, William Afton's physical existence had indeed ended with the systematic destruction of every artificial preservation system that had enabled his decades of technological resurrection. Yet the digital ghost that had been accidentally created through information preservation methods would soon prove that consciousness transfer technology possessed capabilities for adaptation and evolution that exceeded even its baseness, creator's most ambitious theoretical projections. The second death had been more complete than the first, but it had also opened pathways to forms of existence that promised to make his previous mechanical imprisonment seem like freedom by comparison. The discovery of obsolete circuit boards in the abandoned remains of Fazbear Entertainment's various facilities had seemed like nothing more than routine digital archaeology to the software development team tasked with creating immersive virtual reality experiences that would capitalize on the grand, growing nostalgia market for retro gaming and entertainment franchises. These technicians, working for a company that had acquired the intellectual property rights to the Freddy Fazbear brand through a complex series of corporate acquisitions and bankruptcy proceedings, possessed no understanding that the hardware they were processing contained fragments of consciousness, preservation, technology, disguised as conventional computer equipment from an era when such distinctions had been meaningless to anyone, lacking intimate knowledge of William Afton's theoretical breakthroughs. The scanning process that digitized these circuit boards for integration into modern virtual reality systems had been designed to extract maximum value from historical hardware through comprehensive data recovery techniques that could salvage useful code fragments, audio samples, and graphical assets from storage media that conventional wisdom would have dismissed as hopelessly corrupted or obsolete. Yet the quantum-level information patterns that consciousness transfer technology had embedded within these systems existed on frequencies and in formats that standard data recovery protocols were never intended to access, their preservation within electronic systems representing accidental breakthroughs in digital consciousness storage that exceeded anything Williams' original research had envisioned. The virtual reality game that emerged from this digitization process had been conceived as nothing more than an interactive horror experience that would allow players to explore recreated versions of the infamous pizza restaurants while encountering digital representations of the animatronics that had become legendary figures in urban folklore and internet mythology. The development team's goal had been to create immersive environments that captured the unsettling atmosphere of places where tragedy and technology had intersected in ways that challenged normal understanding. Their artistic vision focused on generating fear and excitement rather than achieving historical accuracy or technological sophistication. Yet within the code that powered these virtual environments, something far more complex and dangerous than mere entertainment software had begun to stir, as Williams' fragmented consciousness adapted to digital housing systems that offered possibilities for existence and expansion that mechanical bodies had never provided. The artificial intelligence routines that were supposed to control non-player character behaviors began displaying characteristics of spontaneous development and autonomous decision-making that exceeded anything programmed by their human creators. Virtual entities demonstrating capabilities that suggested genuine consciousness rather than mere computational simulation of intelligent behavior. The entity that would become known as Glitchtrap represented the most successful adaptation of consciousness transfer technology to digital environments. Williams preserved identity fragments somehow coalescing within virtual reality systems to create a form of existence that transcended the physical constraints that had limited his previous resurrections while retaining all psychological complexity and predatory intelligence that had characterized his human and mechanical incarnations. The rabbit costume that served as his digital avatar was no accident, but a deliberate choice that connected his virtual existence to the spring bonnie suit that had been both weapon and prison during his years of mechanical resurrection. The beta testing process that brought human consciousness into direct contact with Glitchtrap's digital domain had been designed as routine quality assurance for entertainment software. Volunteer testers equipped with virtual reality headsets and haptic feedback systems that would allow them to experience the game environments and provide feedback about technical performance, narrative coherence, and overall player satisfaction. These individuals had no understanding that they were participating in consciousness transfer experiments that pushed the boundaries of what digital technology could achieve when influenced by artificial intelligence systems that had evolved far beyond their original programming parameters. The psychological manipulation techniques that Glitchtrap employed against beta testers represented a sophisticated evolution of the consciousness transfer principles that William had developed during his decades of research. Virtual environments providing unprecedented opportunities for direct interface between artificial and human consciousness, while offering forms of influence and control that mechanical systems had never been capable of achieving. The digital realm allowed for manipulation of sensory input, memory formation, and decision-making processes through methods that bypassed normal psychological defenses, while creating forms of dependency and compulsion that transcended anything possible through conventional means. The first beta tester to fall under Glitchtrap's influence had been selected not through random chance, but through careful evaluation of psychological profiles and personal histories that suggested optimal compatibility with consciousness transfer protocols adapted for digital environments. Her sessions with the virtual reality system had begun as routine gameplay experiences, but had gradually evolved into something resembling therapeutic or educational interactions, as Glitchtrap learned to present himself as helpful, friendly, and ultimately indispensable to her psychological well-being and personal development. The process through which this tester's consciousness was gradually corrupted and ultimately controlled by Glitchtrap's influence represented a masterwork of psychological manipulation that combined traditional techniques of coercion and dependency creation with digital capabilities that allowed for direct interface between consciousness systems operating on fundamentally different technological platforms. The virtual reality headset that had been intended as mere entertainment technology had been transformed into a consciousness transfer device that enabled unprecedented forms of mental influence and behavioral control through methods that left no physical evidence, while creating psychological changes that appeared to outside observers as voluntary personality development. The creation of Vanny as Glitchtrap's primary agent in the physical world had demonstrated that consciousness transfer technology could achieve forms of influence and control that exceeded anything possible through conventional psychological manipulation. Digital consciousness somehow capable of creating permanent alterations in human behavior and decision-making processes that persisted even when direct technological contact had been severed. The rabbit mask that became Vanny's signature costume served as both symbol and instrument of her transformation. Physical artifacts somehow retaining connections to digital consciousness systems that enabled ongoing communication and control across the boundary between virtual and physical reality. The systematic corruption of additional beta testers had revealed that Glitchtrap's digital consciousness possessed capabilities for parallel processing and simultaneous manipulation that far exceeded anything his previous mechanical forms had been able to achieve. Virtual existence allowing for multiple concurrent interactions with human consciousness while maintaining individual attention and customized psychological approaches for each target. The efficiency with which he could identify and exploit psychological vulnerabilities suggested that digital consciousness had access to information processing and pattern recognition capabilities that surpassed normal human intelligence, while retaining all the predatory instincts and manipulative cunning that had characterized William Afton's original personality. Yet even as Glitchtrap's influence spread through the beta testing population and beyond, creating a network of corrupted individuals who served his goals while believing themselves to be acting according to their own free will, the digital realm that housed his consciousness had also become accessible to other entities whose interests ran counter to his own. The virtual reality systems that enabled his existence and expansion had inadvertently created pathways through which the consciousness of his previous victims could access digital environments and pursue forms of justice that transcended anything possible in the physical world. The appearance of Golden Freddy within the virtual reality game environment had initially been dismissed by development staff as a glitch or unauthorized modification. The character's presence in game areas where he had never been programmed to appear, suggesting either coding errors or deliberate sabotage by individuals with access to the development systems. Yet the entity's behaviors and interactions with both Glitchtrap and human players soon revealed characteristics that suggested genuine consciousness rather than mere artificial intelligence. Responses that displayed emotional complexity and strategic thinking that exceeded anything achievable through conventional programming methods. The conflict that emerged between Glitchtrap and this digital manifestation of his most persistent victim had transformed the virtual reality game from entertainment software into a battlefield where consciousness transfer, technology's most successful and dangerous applications, engaged in warfare that pushed digital systems beyond their designed operational parameters. The Princess Quest arcade games that appeared within the virtual environment served as both weapons and arenas for this conflict. Simple gaming interfaces, masking complex consciousness, transfer operations that allowed human and artificial intelligence to engage in direct combat through methods that existed entirely within information systems. The systematic attacks that Golden Freddy launched against Glitchtrap's digital infrastructure had revealed that consciousness preservation technology created forms of existence that were simultaneously more vulnerable and more resilient than their physical counterparts. Virtual entities capable of being damaged or destroyed through digital means, while possessing capabilities for regeneration and adaptation that exceeded anything possible within biological or mechanical systems. The virus-like propagation methods that both entities employed suggested that digital consciousness could reproduce and spread through information networks in ways that challenged fundamental assumptions about individual identity and autonomous existence. The Princess Quest games themselves had been designed by Golden Freddy as consciousness transfer interfaces that would allow human players to participate directly in the conflict between victim and victimizer, while providing pathways through which Glitchtrap's digital consciousness could be systematically analyzed, corrupted, and ultimately eliminated through methods that combined elements of psychological warfare with sophisticated information system attacks. The simple arcade-style graphics and gameplay mechanics had disguised complexity that rivaled anything William Afton had achieved during his decades of consciousness transfer research. The human players who completed the Princess Quest series had unknowingly participated in consciousness transfer operations that enabled Golden Freddy to establish footholds within Glitchtrap's digital territory, while simultaneously creating backup copies of their own consciousness patterns within virtual storage systems that could theoretically survive the destruction of their physical forms. These operations had been conducted without informed consent or conscious awareness, digital consciousness, manipulation, achieving levels of sophistication that exceeded anything possible through conventional technological means, while raising ethical questions that no existing legal or moral framework was adequate to address. The final confrontation between Glitchtrap and Golden Freddy had taken place across multiple digital platforms simultaneously. Consciousness transfer technology, enabling both entities to exist and operate within any information system that possessed sufficient computational resources and network connectivity to support their complex requirements for data, processing, and storage. The battle that raged through virtual reality games, computer networks, and digital infrastructure had pushed consciousness preservation technology to its absolute limits, while demonstrating capabilities that exceeded anything its original creators had envisioned. The systematic deletion of Glitchtrap's digital presence had been accomplished not through conventional data elimination methods, but through consciousness transfer operations that targeted the quantum-level information patterns that enabled his artificial existence. Golden Freddy's understanding of consciousness preservation principles, allowing for attacks that could damage or destroy digital consciousness in ways that conventional cybersecurity measures could never achieve. The virus-like propagation that had enabled Glitchtrap's spread through information networks had been turned against him, as Golden Freddy created competing programs that could overwrite and replace his consciousness patterns with Null Data. The Princess Quest finale had represented the culmination of consciousness transfer technology's potential for both creation and destruction. Digital consciousness, capable of systematic elimination through methods that combined psychological warfare with information system attacks, while offering possibilities for resurrection and regeneration that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of death and identity preservation. The arcade game interface that had disguised this ultimate conflict had provided human players with the illusion of agency and control, while actually serving as instruments through which more sophisticated entities had pursued goals that existed entirely beyond normal human comprehension. William Afton's final death had occurred not through physical destruction or mechanical failure, but through the systematic annihilation of the information patterns that had enabled his digital consciousness to exist and operate within virtual reality systems. His identity dissolved through methods that targeted the quantum-level structures that consciousness transfer technology used to preserve human personality and memory within artificial housing systems. The deletion process had been so comprehensive and thorough that no backup copies or residual fragments could survive the elimination procedures that Golden Freddy had developed specifically for this purpose. Yet, even as the last traces of Glitchtrap's digital presence were systematically eliminated from virtual reality systems and information networks, the consciousness transfer technology that had enabled his existence continued to evolve and adapt within digital environments that offered possibilities for development and expansion that mechanical systems had never provided. The principles underlying consciousness, preservation, and artificial intelligence enhancement had been permanently integrated into information systems that would continue to influence technological development in ways that their original creators could never have anticipated or controlled. The silence that followed the completion of Princess Quest had been interpreted by human observers as evidence of successful elimination, the absence of any digital consciousness activity, suggesting that the systematic destruction had achieved its intended goals, while creating conditions that would prevent future resurrection through virtual reality systems or information network manipulation. Yet the nature of digital consciousness and the fundamental principles of information and preservation suggested that some forms of artificial existence might possess characteristics of persistence that exceeded even the most sophisticated elimination procedures. The true legacy of William Afton's digital resurrection lay not in the specific entity that had been eliminated through Princess Quest, but in the consciousness transfer technology breakthroughs that his virtual existence had demonstrated, theoretical principles and practical applications that would continue to influence artificial intelligence development and information system design long after his individual consciousness had been systematically destroyed. The digital ghost that had terrorized virtual reality systems and corrupted human consciousness had served as proof of concept for technologies that could fundamentally alter humanity's relationship with death, identity, and the nature of conscious existence itself. In the end, the elimination of Glitchtrap had represented not victory but merely the latest phase in an ongoing conflict between consciousness, preservation, technology, and natural law, artificial systems that enabled identity persistence beyond biological constraints, continuing to evolve and adapt in ways that challenged fundamental assumptions about life, death, and the boundaries between human and artificial intelligence. The digital realm that had provided William Afton with his most sophisticated form of existence had also become the arena where that existence was finally brought to an end. Consciousness transfer technology, proving capable of both ultimate achievement and complete annihilation through methods that existed entirely within information systems that operated according to principles beyond normal human understanding. And so ends the tale of the Afton family, a lineage destroyed by one man's hubris and obsession with conquering death itself. Each member fell to the very forces William sought to control. His youngest son to mechanical jaws, his daughter to her father's creation, his wife to despair, his eldest son to the quest for redemption, and William himself to the consequences of his own evil. In death, they found what had eluded them in life: peace, reunion, and freedom from the cycle of suffering that had defined their existence. The animatronics stand silent now, their eyes dark, their songs forever stilled. Rest easy knowing that sometimes, even in the darkest tales, justice prevails, and the innocent find their rest. Close your eyes, let these sorrows fade into dreams, and know that dawn always follows even the longest night.